Thank you so much, Dr. Srivastava. And namaskar, sat sri akal, salam alaikum, whatever greetings I can get you here. It's just wonderful to know about the national conference, and very wonderful to know that after a couple of years it's happening on ground. I think that's a very special occasion. Pre-COVID stuff seems like a special occasion now, so that's always wonderful to see. And so I'm really jealous and really envious of you being there and me being here. I would have loved to join you. I do want to say a couple of things. First of all, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for this conversation. I wanted to say that a lot of times, we grow up. I mean, stammering is a very isolating experience. It can be a very isolating, very lonely experience. A lot of us, I'm sure, have felt very unique in this particular feature, this particular trait that we have. And I think when we come to a national gathering such as this changes the script, because here we begin to see the universality. We begin to see the universal experiences also that we share. Not that we are not unique and our experience is not personal, but it's also shared in some way, some shape or form by lots of other people. So I think that is a really interesting, eye-opening experience, particularly for people who come to the national conference or any national conference like this for the first time. So my recommendation is, which I'm sure everybody's already doing, be curious, be open. And the second is to really harness the power of the collective. I think there are lots of things that we can do to shift our relationship with our speech and our experience in general regarding related to our speech that involve getting out of our comfort zones. And those comfort zones are difficult to get out of when we are being solo, when we are going solo. But when we are doing it as part of a group, those same behaviors, those same things like a stranger talk or talking to, a stammering interview with somebody, all of the desensitization activities that are already part of the TISA curriculum become a little bit easier to do. So I think harness the power of the collective, share phone numbers, make friends, connect, all of these things. Yeah. Thank you.
So as a speech scientist, as a teacher, what are a couple of ideas you would share with our audience which can help them to deal with their stammering more successfully, more effectively, and lead a fuller life, a better life? What would you say to them?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think for my part of the 100 years, I can say that I actually take my cue from all of the wisdom through the ages, which has been collected cumulatively from research on stammering, on the kind of work that speech pathologists and other counselors have done with people who stammer, people like us, and also the personal experiences of lots of people who have been helped by this. And I think a lot of the management, whichever way you look at it, goes through acceptance. So I'll talk about acceptance. I think it's a complicated construct. It's a complicated concept. So I'll talk about acceptance and some of the recommendations, some of the suggestions, which are not novel to what I am saying. They're out there in the research. They're out there in the literature. I mean, they're there as part of the TISA curriculum. They're already there. So I'll just emphasize a few things, which I think can be quite useful. One is, I think we all understand acceptance at some level, but I think acceptance has three qualities. In my experience, it has three major qualities. One is it's personal. Second is that it's fluid. And third, that it is very complicated. It's personal because we all have our own particular interpretations of what acceptance means to us. So I'll give you my version of it. It's just one version of it. My version of acceptance is that stammering is in the body. Whether it shows up reliably or not, it's in the body. And it enters the body during childhood. For most of us during childhood. And it enters because of differences in genetics and differences in neurophysiology. I think over 50 years of research is showing us that we are wired both genetically and neurologically, a little bit differently. And that's been a pretty consistent finding in most of the research that has been done. We are learning that even children who stutter, particularly children who stammer, who don't go out of it, who continue to stammer, like a lot of us, their brain development follows a slightly different path from children who do not stammer and who do recover, as far as speech formulation and speech production is concerned. So I think there's early evidence of neurophysiological differences, and certainly there's been evidence of genetic differences for a very long time. So it enters the body during childhood, and for a lot of us, it stays in the body for many reasons, not the least of which is our experience with it. And so now, as adults, it is very much part of the body. It is in our heads, it is in our thoughts. We think about it a lot. A lot of us think about it incessantly, compulsively, obsessively. A lot of us do it. For many of us, it is part of our emotional lives, a very important part of our emotional lives. It colors the way we feel about ourselves. It colors our confidence. And it's certainly in our mouths. It is also in our avoidance behaviors. So I think acceptance means, to me, my version is accepting that as an adult, stammering is going to be an enduring presence in my body in some shape or form and degree. It doesn't mean it's not going to change. It doesn't mean my relationship or your relationship, anybody's relationship is not going to shift. Obviously, it shifts. Stuttering itself shifts because it's variable and it's cyclical. Those are the essential qualities about what stammering is. So my first recommendation is find some version of acceptance that resonates with you. Something that makes it, something that how you define it, how you work through it makes it easier to, make sense. To me, one of the things that resonated with me very early on in my journey was that I'm wired differently. That was a very empowering notion to me, because until then I thought I was at fault, I was defective, my parents did something wrong, it's the fault of society, it's all of those kinds of things. And it just happens to be, I just happen to be wired differently in this particular case. I could have been wired differently in another situation. There's a lot of neurodiversity in nature. I could have had a hearing impairment, I could have had some other condition or whatever. This is just one of the things I've had because I was wired differently. That's been a very important, powerful thing for me, because then I can accept it and move on in how I manage my experience in a different kind of a way. So whatever version of acceptance resonates with you, I think about it, write it down, look at it, get behind it. I think that can be very useful.
That a young person, he gets very alarmed when we tell them, when you and I tell them that, look, acceptance is the first portal, first door. And they get very upset. They think that by accepting, it means that you have accepted defeat. They would rather want to kick the shit out of stammering rather than accepting that I stammer. So can you sort of give them some more logic, some more, something which appeals to the heart of a young person? Why should they accept?
Yeah, I think.
And what guarantee is there that after accepting they will not slide back?
Yeah, I think acceptance. I think it's fundamentally important to understand how stammering works in the first place, which is sort of the biological and the behavioral basis for acceptance. Acceptance, I see your point exactly, that there is oftentimes acceptance is equated with resignation. It's actually the opposite. Acceptance leads to change because it opens up our options, right? There are lots of things that we cannot control in the world. We accept them, which gives us a lot of options for what we can do with what we have. I think that is the important point. I think acceptance broadens our options. It doesn't limit our options. Acceptance is conducive to change. It is not anti-change. It's the exact opposite. It's how you frame acceptance. So like I said for sure that it's okay. So it's going to be part of the body in some enduring way for the foreseeable future. But that doesn't mean it's not going to change. That doesn't mean I cannot shift my relationship with it. In fact, it is the conduit. It is the way to change relationship with it. Because by accepting, I am doing the kinds of things that are lowering my emotional reactivity towards it. The more I lower my emotional reactivity towards the stammering experience, the more I'm open about it, the more I self-disclose, whether we call it self-disclosure or advertising or whatever we say, the more openness I have about it, the less I perceive my own speech to be a threat. And the typical response in a threatening situation, when we perceive our speech as a threat, is that it ramps up muscle tension. Now, that muscle tension that we typically experience during a moment of stammering, before it starts happening before, we get tight before, interferes with the production of speech. That's the mechanism. So you can call it two parts of the iceberg, हिमखंड का हिस्सा जो पानी के ऊपर है, हिमखंड का हिस्सा जो पानी के नीचे है. You can call it like that, about what is the circular nature of the relationship. You can say two sides of the coin. You can say two sides of the hand, whatever. These are two sides of the stammering experience. You can say what is outside and what is inside. What is inside is fueling what is outside, and what is outside is impacting what is inside. So I think acceptance is a big way to break that cycle. And this is a very self-perpetuating cycle, because the more I hide my stammer, because I'm not accepting of it, the more I avoid, the more I suppress, I'm actually in the process of protecting myself. These are defensive postures. In the process of protecting myself, I'm incubating fear. I'm incubating anxiety. Incubating fear and investing in anxiety, which we feel like, why are we so afraid, is because we've invested in it. We've engaged in avoidance behavior. And one of the reasons we engage in avoidance behavior is because we don't have full acceptance. We feel shame. We feel guilty. Now, all of this stuff is not going to go away overnight. This is going to be a long-term process, which I think, stammering is a journey. But I think that is my response to you, that acceptance broadens our options, because it allows us to experience the moment of stammering differently in the body with less emotional reactivity. And that less emotional reactivity physically could translate into less muscle tension. Less muscle tension can mean more forward-moving speech, less tense speech. Less muscle tension and acceptance could also mean, especially if I've told you, if I've disclosed very openly that I'm a person who stammers, I can also say in the next breath, I'm going to move my speech a little bit differently here, because I want to move a little bit more forward. So I can use that opportunity to practice my techniques. Acceptance opens up all those options. It allows us to do the best with what we have. So contrary to the popular sort of the knee-jerk response, which is acceptance, like, why should I accept? Obviously, I'm going to repeat this thing. It's not a helpful posture, is my long-winded way of answering your question.
I would like to add just one thing. Many people think that acceptance is the easy way out, or is meant for people who are defeatist by nature. But the truth is just the opposite. And it reminds me of a statement from Gandhi. Gandhi said that non-violence is not for coward. Non-violence is meant for brave people. It's only brave people who can implement non-violence in its truest spirit. In the same way, when we say accept your stammering, we are not asking you to stand down, to bend your knees, go down on your knees to your stammering. No, we are only asking that give up that unnecessary struggle and work on your communication skills. I mean, we always say this whole thing in TISA, but people, I don't know why, they take only the first half and ignore the second half. We always say accept stammering, but work on your communication skills. They forget the second half and they simply say, oh, TISA promotes acceptance, and that is no good. So this is the problem, that as you said, that once we accept that here is a fact, which is not going to go away simply because I am fighting it, then we are left free to move forward. Thank you so much. Okay, so what are your other ideas about how people can help themselves?
Well, I want to go back to some of the earlier points about acceptance being fluid and being very complicated. I think a lot of the recommendations come out of that. So let me develop that a little bit. So I think acceptance is fluid. I think we should recognize that. We are more accepting of our speech in some situations, less accepting in other situations. In safer environments, we are more accepting. In less safe environments, high risk situations, high perceived situations, we tend to avoid more. We tend to feel more shame. Acceptance is also varies by phase of life. The way I am right now, how accepting I am about my own speech, whether I stammer or not, is very different from when I was in my 20s, right? That's what the being collectively 100 years old does. It just brings the basic wisdom. It's just, I'm much more accepting of it than I was earlier. And acceptance can vary quite a bit. So it's a fluid thing. It's also very complicated because we may know intellectually that we are people who stammer. We may feel it. We may be okay with it emotionally as well. But entrenched behaviors, habitual patterns, avoidances are very difficult to break. So I think it's complicated because although we may embrace it cognitively, embrace it emotionally, a lot of us, various times in our lives, don't actually embrace it in a behavioral way. We continue to engage in avoidances. So I think just having explained a little bit about what are the consequences of the avoidance behavior, I think I want to move to what are some recommendations around it. I think the crucial thing, which is the activities that are part of the TISA curriculum or any self-help organization or which are out there, the desensitization activities are approach behaviors. So we engage in avoidance behaviors a lot. Body is used to you doing avoidance behaviors. So I think what we need to consider doing the opposite of what we have been doing all along in our lives, in a way, flipping the script. The script has been to hide. The script has been to suppress. The script has been to pass off as fluent for a lot of us. And I think flipping the script can mean doing the opposite, which is talk about stammering openly, which is something very much part of the TISA culture. Talk about stammering openly, first in our safe spaces, in our comfort zone, and then over time, gradually into our what are called brave spaces, zones that are not as comfortable. Second is, I think, really understanding what the role that avoidance behavior plays and tracking our avoidance behavior. This has been a very important part of my process, that when I decided to sort of, very consciously shift my relationship with my speech, I used to journal. What are the different avoidance behaviors I've used today? How many times did I change a word? How many times in class when I wanted to ask a question, I did not raise my hand? I think the first thing to understand is avoidance behavior has real consequences. And it keeps stammering hot. It keeps us investing and incubating in that fear, that anxiety, which actually is very counterproductive to forward movement of speech. So I think tracking avoidance behavior can be very helpful, because unless we track a certain behavior, until we reflect on it, until we have a good sense of what we do on a daily basis, it'll be very difficult to make any changes in that. Some of the changes I have made in very consciously reducing my avoidance behaviors some years ago were things like, if I substituted a word in a conversation, if I avoided a word in a conversation because I changed it, I would make sure that I say the avoided word in the conversation. I wouldn't get myself off the hook. I would make sure that somehow, whether it's stammered or not or whatever, I would take a second chance with the same word that I did not say.
In the same conversation.
In the same conversation.
In the same conversation.
In the same conversation as much as possible, because I'm teaching my body to experience stammering differently, to experience stammering with less fear, less negativity, less anxiety, less emotional reactivity, which complicates the experience a lot. So that's one thing. I was very encouraged and very heartened by seeing some previous TOPG groups actually in TISA go back to their school, go back to their college and talk to professors and teachers with whom they may have had a stressful experience with their speech. Good. That's another way to sort of like manage the avoidance behavior, becoming very conscious of it and going through it that way. Third, self-disclosure, announcing that we are people who stammer. Again, just like talking about stammering needs to go in safe spaces to brave spaces, I think even the same thing can be said for self-disclosure, right? So that's actually really important. And one of the things that self-disclosure does, talking about your stammering, putting it out there, coming out of the closet right away in a conversation, is that it kind of like lowers anxiety. I think a lot of fear that we feel, a lot of anxiety, I mean, anxiety is related to uncertainty. And a lot of anxiety and uncertainty that we feel is because we don't know how the listeners are going to react. Or we assume that they're going to react negatively because of the experience that we've had in the past. But if you are putting it out there, saying that you're a person who stammers, you're adjusting expectations right away, that this conversation can go down a little bit differently. I'm going to name it. I'm going to tell you that I'm a person who stammers. And I'm going to ask for what will help us. If eye contact is helpful, I'm going to ask for that. If asking the person to not interrupt me is helpful, I'm going to ask for that. Whatever allows me to beat time pressure is going to be helpful. Now, none of that I will be able to do effectively if I don't set the expectation right at the beginning. I think so self-disclosure has a very practical purpose because it allows us to adjust expectations in the conversation, and we lower our anticipatory anxiety, our anticipation, because then we're not concerned about hiding it, or will it come out, or will it not come out, on all this mental gymnastics that we do is in a way slightly off the table because we've announced it. That's one thing. And the fourth, what I call an acceptance practice, all these I call acceptance practices, because you can call them desensitization exercises, you can call them approach behaviors, you can also call them acceptance practices. These are the ways of practicing acceptance, because knowing it is one thing, feeling it is one thing, but doing it is a whole other level. So I think the last acceptance practice I want to talk about is voluntary stammering. And voluntary stammering I have found to be a very powerful tool, not just in terms of lowering my fear, my anxiety, but it is a pattern interruption. It's a massive pattern interruption. Something that I had no control over, I'm doing willingly. Something that I used to hide, I'm doing it on purpose. I have full control over when I stammer, how I stammer, on what word I stammer. At least I begin with that intention. So the voluntary stammering, which can look like this, which can be a little bit of light, little heavy, or it could be heavier like this, whatever it is. Play with it across different situations. I think it will allow us to feel stammering differently in the body. So those are the four things. I think the idea is that whatever avoidance behavior we do, whatever shame we feel, however fearful we are, anxious we are, is going to lead to some natural behaviors in the body, which are going to be about suppressing the stammer, are going to be about hiding the stammer. That's just going to complicate the experience further. Because by doing all that, we are going to be tight and tense. And tight and tense is not really the best way to engage in speech in a more forward-moving kind of way. So lowering emotional reactivity through these acceptance practices is, I think, can be very, very helpful. And most of the research, most of the clinical work, most of the experiences of people who stammer, who are on a different part, who are in the journey, but in a different place with it, will tell you very similar kinds of things. Give yourself little projects. And I think this is where, going back to the earlier point about harnessing the power of the collective is so helpful. If I have to do self-disclosure in the mall or in a shop or on the street, that's going to be a daunting task for my body to tolerate. But if I am with somebody, I'm with a couple of friends and we're taking turns, it becomes a little bit easier. Kind of the same thing. If I have to go for a jog at 6 in the morning on my own, I'm going to shut off the alarm. But if I have an appointment with a friend, I'll get there, or I'm more likely to get there. Let's just say. So harnessing the power of the collective there can be very, very useful, because the kind of risk taking, what can feel like a risk, which we are not used to taking on our own, we can do much better in a group, and I think that can be quite helpful. So I guess that's my own personal collective wisdom, which is not my personal at all. It's coming from, so many years of work in this area. I guess that's what I've got to say. Well, what are some things coming from your side?
So I would say what I've learned collectively in TISA, from TISA, is this: that people benefit a lot when they take their practice into social spaces. So I would like to say to them that take your stammering, think of your stammering as your superpower, put it on your arm and go out into the metros, into the train, into the shopping malls. And in fact, as you said, the power of collective. To demonstrate that some of the people in this in the NC have really today gone to the metro station, to the shopping mall, and one of them was very young person. His name is Vansh Sharma. Vansh is, I think, is hardly 16 or 15. He also went with this group, and they went to this metro, and they talked about stammering openly with the people there. So this is what I'm trying to say, that whatever you are doing, whether your technique is absolutely wonderful technique or it is a questionable technique, whatever it is, take your technique into social spaces. So for example, if you're fond of and if you believe in tongue twisters, don't do them in your home. Go to the park and try it there. There other people also are there. Do it in when you're riding the bus, in the metro. Try your tongue twisters. Chandu ke chacha ne chandu ki chachi ko chandi ke chamal se. That would be so much more beneficial to people. So whether it is bouncing prolongation, or whether it is eye contact, or whether it is speaking loudly, or enunciating every word clearly, whatever you want to do it in social spaces. This is one thing which I want to recommend, because this is what has benefited me also tremendously. As long as I was trying to deal with my stammering in the privacy of my home, because I had this wonderful idea that if I work on my stammering, I'll become cured and nobody will know. Nobody will know that Sachin ever stammered. and then I realized that this excessive desire to keep everything under the wraps, hidden, that itself is a part of disease. So then the change came over me, and then I began going in social spaces. Then I began talking about stammering. Then I began writing on the blog, and so things changed. So this is one thing which I have understood in last 60 years, that whatever you do, if you do it in social spaces, it will give you much powerful results, and a lot more quickly. And second thing which I want to say is about the people that I've seen, that stammerers read a lot. They watch a lot of movies. They watch a lot of YouTube videos. They download PDF files by tons, and they browse all kind of things. But unfortunately, it's all very narrow focused. Whatever they browse on internet, on YouTube, it's always, keeps round and round just one thing: stammering and its cure. And unfortunately, they land up on such kind of websites: cure your stammering under 7 minutes, cure any kind of stammering in 15 days. So all these kind of wonderful things they see, or they would come across an advertisement like order our DVD set, and cure your stammering at home in 15 days through our postal course. And they are invariably hijacked by these schemes. But as you and I know, that stammering has got a influence of a lot of things. It's not only our body, it's our mind also. It's also about the society in which we live. It also depends on the paradigm in which our culture has come up. So therefore, a stammerer is much better armed to deal with stammering if he knows a little bit of psychology, a little bit of anthropology, a little bit of sociology, a little bit of everything, all these sciences. So I would recommend the stammerers to read broadly, browse broadly, learn a lot of things. I mean, I have learned a lot which I've applied to my own stammering. I've learned a lot from gender studies, the difficulty women have faced and how they have come up with solutions, how they have changed their society, how they have changed the gender norms, how they have questioned so many things. In the same way, I've learned a lot from LGBTQ community. And a lot of those ideas are so applicable to our stammering team. In fact, this TISA thing has happened because I've learned a lot from this LGBTQ community. I discovered that LGBTQ, as long as they were struggling alone, nobody took them seriously. But when they united, when they had an association, when they had a community and a organized movement and a organized pride parade on the Rajpath, only then they were able to challenge regressive laws of the country. Only then they were able to question various questionable practices in the employment sector, in the legal sector. So this is what I would say, that if you're fond of reading, if you like to browse broadly. Don't just limit yourself to one thing, that I have to just find the cure of stammering and then I have to practice that for 2 weeks and then I'll be cured, and that's the end of chapter, end of verse. Stammering is not like that. It requires a lot of ideas. And so these are the two things which I would like to recommend. Other things you have covered, like acceptance, power of collective. In fact, I was watching some of the videos which were taken during this NC, and I saw these young people talking about stammering with strangers in the shopping mall, in the metro station. That was so heartwarming. It made me feel so good that people are changing, things are changing, and as we are changing, our society is changing, people are changing. So it really makes me feel very good that we are no more looking at stammering as a problem of a stammerer alone, or it's a problem between a stammerer and his therapist. No, it's a problem of everybody. It's a problem of whole society. And unless we do not go out and talk to people in social spaces, things will not change very much for us. And so these are the two ideas I would like to offer to the audience today. Thank you so much.
I want to connect a little bit to what you said about taking the cue from a lot of other marginalized communities like LGBTQ. I think a lot of these acceptance practices that we know about very well, self-disclosure, voluntary stammering, being open about it, talking about it, reducing avoidance behavior. When we do these things, I think we naturally also advocate. I think that is the other component of it. These behaviors are not just behaviors for us. We are representing a community. We are representing our tribe. And I think that is again connecting to the point about the power of the collective, right? When I disclose openly, when I do the subway challenge, which I've done many, many times, which is stand in the subway, stand in the train and say, hello, my name is Amit. I'm a person who stammers. I'm doing this exercise because I want to work on my speech. When I say these things, I'm advocating for the community. So I think that is another big plus of a lot of these acceptance practices, that not only do they reduce fear and anxiety within ourselves, they also allow us to speak up for everybody.
Since the time is short, I would quickly jump to the second section. And I would like to ask you, what are a couple of ideas which have come as a surprise to you in the field of recent developments in speech science or speech literature or the movies or the books you have read? What do you think? Couple of things which have surprised you?
Well, can you go first on that one, because I can take that's okay.
Okay, okay. Being the senior in years, I will take the lead. One idea which has really surprised me when I read this article towards a notion of transfluency by this Spanish writer, I was totally taken aback. For me, it was a very bold idea at that time. And then I read a lot more about it, transfluency, because basically what he's positing is this, that stammering should not be seen as a disorder or disease, but should be seen as a diversity. We all have our own way of speaking. Somebody speaks with a Punjabi accent. Somebody speaks with a Bihari accent. That is not a disease. So in the same way, somebody takes a little more time to complete what he wants to say. And that is just a diversity. So that was a big surprise for me. And in fact, I became so fond of that idea that I shared this idea in TISA, and I found many people who immediately latched onto that idea. And many people began using a label here, transfluencer. Shailendra, transfluencer. So that is one thing I would say, Nagal, the things which I have read and seen in last couple of years, last decade. What do you think? I mean, in speech science, from your perspective, what are the things which have come as a surprise to you?
Yeah, there are. So I want to connect to what you just said. I think one of the things that has been has been trending for a long time here in speech pathology as well, speech therapy as well, is related to what you just said in terms of transfluency, looking at stammering from a neurodiversity standpoint. I mean, there's been a movement to that for many years, but I think it's becoming more overt. I'm reading articles on that. I'm reading, it's much more in the media. And I think the framing of stammering from a neurodiversity standpoint is really interrupting how we have done speech therapy for a very long time, in a good way. It's interrupting it in a very good way, because it's making us think about stammering as a holistic experience. For a lot of years, I think speech pathologists have focused so heavily on the speech motor work, on the actual motor movements that a person can make, that it has been so one-sided quite often, that one has not attended to, even in research, the quality of life issues. What are some, in what ways does connecting with self-help organizations work? So a lot of those topics become very important topics to explore when you look at stammering from a neurodiversity standpoint. I want to just take off from what you said about, this notion of transfluency. That puts stammering in the neurodiversity column right away. And that makes us do things very differently in terms of managing the stammering experience. It is also changing, or actually, let's just say including or adding a lot of research paradigms that have been ignored in speech pathology. For example, a lot of the work, a lot of the research in stammering has been empirically based. It's very it's very quantitative. You take two groups, you work out the speech motor pattern here versus the speech motor pattern over here. You see how people who are different doing it this kind of way. This completely ignores, in a certain way, the life experience of a person who is stammering. So I think what I've been delighted by, and not as much surprised, but in terms of really encouraged by, is this trend to look at stammering from a neurodiversity lens. Because then it allows us to look at management differently, naturally looking at it in a more holistic kind of a way. And also, research practices then can change. Because in research, then we can apply more qualitative methodologies. We can apply more ethnographic interviewing. We can do more focus groups, right? So to really figure out the life experience. So I think that's been a hugely important thing. I'm constantly reading about stammering from a biological sense as well. I look at it as a social thing, but I also look at it from a biological lens. There's been a lot of very interesting brain research, very, very interesting brain research, because now the technology allows us to actually get directly in there, right? To look at how the brain is looking, how it's functioning in various activities that are out there. So it's just fascinating stuff. And what I'm also, I guess what I'm surprised by maybe, or not so surprised by, is that most of the brain research is confirming what we have known about stammering from a behavioral standpoint, neurologically as well. So what are the neurological differences, right? So that's been, it's getting more and more confirmed through most of biological work. So I look at both sides of it. I look at the biological side of it, I look at the social side of it, but it's also wonderful to look at stammering increasingly from a neurodiversity lens, because that is interrupting both our work practices as well as our research practices in a really good way.
And it also makes us feel very good. I mean, we can simply say that, look, I'm different. You all are same. You all are same, but I am different. I came across a very interesting blog. The title was How to Stammer More. That also was inspired by the same idea, that instead of asking a stammerer to stop stammering, let us ask him to stammer even more. And that, I think, was also the idea from Van Riper when he said, you know how to speak, but you do not know how to stammer. So let me teach you how to stammer. And then this whole thing came about the stuttering modification. And before you leave, I want to thank you on behalf of all of us, because you have been serving us so well as a volunteer for last couple of years. And
well, the privilege is all mine. The privilege and the pleasure is all mine. I have thoroughly enjoyed and gained so much, and hopefully contributed a little bit to the TISA community, the stammering community in India. And it is just, it feels like a wonderful homecoming. So thank you.
सबसे महत्वपूर्ण बात उन्होंने बताई है एक्सेप्टेंस के बारे में। और जैसा कि आप में से कुछ लोगों ने समझा भी होगा कि मैंने उनसे पूछा भी कि एक्सेप्टेंस क्यों जरूरी है आखिर, क्योंकि कई युवा लोग को उसमें ऐतराज होता है कि अगर हमने स्वीकार कर लिया कि हम हकलाते हैं तो फिर क्या बचा, फिर तो सब कुछ खत्म हो गया। लेकिन जैसे वो कह रहे हैं कि एक्सेप्टेंस का मतलब ये नहीं है कि आप हाथ पे हाथ धर के बैठ जाएं, आपने हार मान ली। नहीं, एक्सेप्टेंस का मतलब जो है वो एक्सेप्टेंस जो वो पहला चरण है अपने आप को बदलने की दिशा में। और एक्सेप्टेंस जो है वो एक बहुत ही पर्सनल चीज है, क्योंकि स्टैमरिंग कहीं ना कहीं हमारे शरीर में है। और इसीलिए स्टैमरिंग जो है वो पर्सनल भी है, यानी हम सब के लिए अलग अलग उसका मायने हो सकता है। वो फ्लूइड भी है और कॉम्प्लिकेटेड भी है। इन तीनों शब्दों का मतलब ये है कि एक्सेप्टेंस का मतलब हम सबको अपने लिए खुद तलाशना होगा कि मेरे लिए, मैं जिस अवस्था में हूँ जिंदगी की, मैं जिंदगी की जिस स्टेज में हूँ, वहां पे मेरे लिए एक्सेप्टेंस का मतलब क्या हो सकता है। क्योंकि एक्सेप्टेंस जो है, क्योंकि स्टैमरिंग जो है वो हमारे इमोशंस को, हमारे व्यवहार को और हमारी सोच को, तीनों चीजों को प्रभावित करती है। अफेक्ट, बिहेवियर एंड कॉग्निशन। मतलब हमारे इमोशंस, हमारी फीलिंग, हमारी भावनाएं, हमारी सोच, हमारे ख्याल जो हमारे दिमाग में आते हैं, और हमारा व्यवहार, इन तीनों चीजों को स्टैमरिंग इसके ऊपर असर डालती है। इसलिए एक्सेप्टेंस में भी जब हम कर रहे हैं एक्सेप्टेंस, तो हम सोचें कि इन तीनों डिपार्टमेंट्स में मुझे क्या क्या करना है। कहाँ पे मुझे अपनी सोच बदलने की आवश्यकता है, वो मैं कैसे बदलूं, कहाँ पे मैं अपना व्यवहार बदल सकता हूँ, और मेरे कौन से ऐसे इमोशंस हैं जो दुखी हैं हकलाने की वजह से, उनको मैं कैसे संभालूं। और इसको करने के लिए जो है उन्होंने बोला है कि फ्लिप द स्क्रिप्ट, यानी हकलाने को लेके हमने एक स्क्रिप्ट डेवलप कर ली थी बचपन से कि इससे बच के रहना है, उससे बच के रहना है, ये शब्द नहीं बोलना है, क्लास में अटेंडेंस नहीं देना है। वो सारी जो स्क्रिप्ट थी, उस स्क्रिप्ट को बदलने की, उसको पूरा उल्टा कर देना है। मतलब स्टैमरिंग हमारे बदन में इंजीनियर कर दी गई है, अब उसको हम रिवर्स इंजीनियर कर रहे हैं, पूरी स्क्रिप्ट को हम उल्टा कर दे रहे हैं। तो इसमें जो है 4 व्यवहार हैं जिसको उन्होंने जोर देकर बताया कि टॉक अबाउट इट ओपनली, हकलाने के बारे में खुलकर बात करो। अगर आप लिखने का शौक है तो हकलाने के बारे में आप लिखो, ब्लॉग पे कविताएं लिखो हकलाने के बारे में, हकलाने के बारे में अजनबियों से बात करो। नंबर 2 है बिकम मोर अवेयर ऑफ अवॉइडेंस बिहेवियर्स, यानी हमारे जो बच के चलने वाला जो व्यवहार था, खतरों से बच बच के चलना। अगर प्रोफेसर सामने आ रहा है तो मुड़ जाना, ताकि गुड मॉर्निंग ना बोलना पड़े, क्योंकि आपको मालूम है गुड मॉर्निंग में आप फंस जाएंगे। तो ये जो खतरों से बच बच कर चलने की हमने ये जो प्रवृत्ति बना ली थी बचपन से, उसको हम समझने लगे, क्योंकि जब तक आप किसी चीज के प्रति अवेयर नहीं होते तब तक आप उसको बदल नहीं सकते। इन ऑर्डर टू चेंज समथिंग फर्स्ट टू बिकम अवेयर। तो अवॉइडेंस बिहेवियर के प्रति एक जागरूकता पैदा करना कि रोज मैं ऐसी क्या चीजें करता हूं जो कि मेरे अवॉइडेंस बिहेवियर है और जो मेरे अवॉइडेंस को और बढ़ाती जा रही है। रोज मैं किन चीजों से कतरा रहा हूं। तो डेवलपिंग ए अवेयरनेस कि आपको इस बात का पता हो कि वो ऐसे कौन से व्यवहार हैं, कौन से विचार हैं जिनसे मैं कतराता हूं, जिससे मैं बचता हूं। दूसरा है और तीसरा पॉइंट है सेल्फ डिस्क्लोज एज अर्ली एज पॉसिबल इन द इंटरेक्शन। किसी भी बातचीत में जब आप बातचीत करते हैं, चाहे वो इंटरव्यू हो चाहे इनफॉर्मल बातचीत हो, जितनी जल्दी आप ये बता देंगे कि भाई मैं हकलाता हूँ, उतना काम आपका आसान हो जाएगा। सामने वाला भी थोड़ा कंफर्टेबल हो जाएगा, क्योंकि वरना वो उसे गेस करना पड़ेगा कि इस आदमी को क्या हो रहा है। कई बार ऐसा भी हुआ है कि हम एक ब्लॉक में गए हैं और सामने वाला इतना नादान है, उसको लगता है कि इस आदमी को कोई मिर्गी के द्वारा पड़ गया है। तो अगर हम पहले ही ये बात बता दें कि मैं कभी कभी हकलाता हूँ, मुझे कभी कभी बोलने में मुश्किलें होती हैं, तो अगर आप पहले बोल देंगे तो आपके सामने वाला तैयार हो जाएगा और आप भी बहुत सारी अनावश्यक चिंता से बच जाए। वरना आपके मन में चलता रहता है कि मुझे इस शब्द से बचना है, उस शब्द से बचना है, मुझे छिपा के रखना है इसको। उसके चक्कर में आप तमाम जो छोटी छोटी गलतियां करते हैं उससे आप बच जाएंगे, उस चिंता से बच जाएंगे, सामने वाला कंफर्टेबल हो जाएगा। और आखिरी बात है सेल्फ डिस्क्लोजर के बाद, वो है वॉलंटरी स्टैमरिंग। वॉलंटरी स्टैमरिंग सिर्फ वही नहीं है जो हम लोग कभी कभी करते हैं तीसा में। वॉलंटरी स्टैमरिंग में स्टडी कुछ जाता, थोड़ा सा आपने अपने बाउंस करके बोला, वो भी वॉलंटरी स्टैमरिंग है। थोड़ा आपने प्रोलॉन्ग करके बोला, कोई नई टेक्निक इस्तेमाल करके बोला, वो भी तरह की वॉलंटरी स्टैमरिंग है। मतलब स्पीच अगर नॉर्मल नहीं लग रही है तो वो स्टैमरिंग है, और अगर वो आप जानबूझ के कर रहे हैं तो वो वॉलंटरी स्टैमरिंग है। तो वॉलंटरी स्टैमरिंग जो है वो एक बहुत अच्छा व्यवहार है, हथियार है एक्सेप्टेंस को प्रैक्टिस करने का, और आपके दिमाग में जो स्क्रिप्ट बन गई है बचपन से, उस स्क्रिप्ट को रिवर्स करना। और मैंने 2 पॉइंट दिए थे, आप सब जानते हैं कि गेट सोशल। हमेशा तीसरा में हम कहते आए हैं कि आपको जो भी करना है, आपको टंग ट्विस्टर करने हैं, किसी मंत्र का जाप करना है तो अकेले में मत करिए, किसी सोशल स्पेस में जाके करिए, अपने सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप में जाके करिए। और मतलब आप अपने हकलाने को अपनी सुपर पावर या अपने टैलेंट के रूप में लेकर जाइए उसको, ग्रुप्स में, मीटिंग्स में, पार्टी में, और वहां पे आप अपने जो कुछ करना वो करिए, जो भी टेक्निक आप यूज करना चाहते हैं। और आखिरी बात मैं कहना चाहूंगा कि आप जो भी पढ़ रहे हैं कृपया उसका दायरा बढ़ाइए, और ज्यादा वीडियोस देखिए, और ज्यादा पढ़िए, साइकोलॉजी थोड़ा पढ़ लीजिए, एंथ्रोपोलॉजी पढ़िए, एलजीबीटीक्यू कम्युनिटी से सीखने का प्रयास करिए, जेंडर स्टडीज से देखिए वहां पे वो लोग क्या कर रहे हैं, और डिसेबिलिटीज डाइवर्सिटीज में लोग क्या करते हैं, क्या हो रहा है, और इससे आपको फायदा होगा। तो मोटी मोटी बातें मैं ये कहना चाहता था। तो एक बार फिर से बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद डॉक्टर अमित का कि आपने 1 घंटे का समय निकाला